Seraphine had learned, a long time ago, that the safest place to stand was somewhere no one was looking. She was good at it, years of practice. Eyes down, movements small, breath quiet. In the great hall of Ironblood Pack, where stone walls rose 20 feet high and wolf lords from 6 territories sat at tables that cost more than her entire life, Seraphine was nothing more than a pair of hands carrying a silver tray. That was enough. That was fine. The Solstice Gathering happened once every 3 years, and it was always the same. Powerful men laughing too loudly, wine poured too freely, the air thick with the particular kind of arrogance that only gathered when powerful people were in the same room, confirming each other's importance. Seraphine had worked 3 of these now. She knew every corner, every blind spot, every safe path between the tables. She took the wrong one. It was a single misstep, a foot catching the uneven edge of a stone tile she had crossed 100 times without trouble. The tray tilted, her hands fought it. She almost won. Almost. The wine went sideways in a slow, graceful arc, and landed directly on the coat of Elder Vorin of the southern ridge, deep red across pale fur trim, spreading fast and irreversible. The table went quiet. Then the room went quiet. Then Alpha King Caelan Duskmoore, seated at the head of the long table, with the particular stillness of a man who has never once in his life been ignored, turned his head and looked at her. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing about Caelan. He never needed to. His voice was the kind that carried without effort, the kind that filled a room the way cold fills a room, getting into everything without permission. This, he said, looking at Seraphine the way a person looks at a broken chair, is what the moon goddess gives us for omegas. He let a short pause settle over the room. She must be running low on material. The laughter came in waves. Not from everyone, she noticed that, filed it away the same way she had learned to file away small, useful truths, but from enough people that it filled the hall. Seraphine did not look up. She crouched down and began gathering the broken glass from the floor with her bare hands, working quickly and carefully, pressing the sharp edges between her fingers, rather than letting them scatter across the stone where someone might step on them later. She did not notice she was bleeding until she was already halfway to the kitchen. She wrapped her hand in a cloth, put the cloth in her pocket, and went back for the next tray. The forest at the edge of Ironblood territory was the one place Seraphine had claimed entirely for herself, not because anyone had given it to her, but because no one else wanted it. Too far from the main buildings to be convenient, too quiet to be interesting. She went there on nights when the walls of the pack house felt like they were pressing inward, which happened more and more lately. She was not there to pray. She had stopped praying 3 years ago. It had begun to feel like sending letters to an address she was no longer sure existed. She sat with her back against a wide tree and looked at the sky through the gap in the branches and thought about nothing in particular, which was the only real rest she knew how to take. The light came without warning. Not moonlight. She knew moonlight. This was something different, something that had weight to it, that landed on her skin like a warm hand pressing gently. She looked down at her arms and saw silver tracing across them like ink finding its own path, following lines she hadn't known were there. She should have been afraid. She was not afraid. The warmth that moved through her was the opposite of fear. It was the feeling of a door opening in a room she had been locked in so long she had forgotten there was a door. Something ancient and unhurried moved through her, and then settled, and then was quiet. She sat there for a long time after, breathing carefully, not entirely sure what had just happened to her, but aware, in some deep and wordless place, that something had recognized her. Something had looked directly at her, with full knowledge of everything she was, and had not looked away. She pressed her uninjured hand flat against the bark of the tree, and stayed very still. Inside the hall, Caelan doubled over so fast that his second, Aldrich, knocked his chair back, getting to him. "My lord, I am fine." He was not fine. Something was burning in his forearm with a precision that felt deliberate, like a signature being pressed into wax. He pulled back his sleeve. The mark was silver, delicate lines arranged in a pattern he had never seen in any text, any record, any territory map. It was not his pack mark. It was not any pack mark he recognized. The elders crowded around him. Then the room changed. There was no other word for it. The air shifted the way air shifts before lightning. Pressure dropping, something gathering, and every wolf in the hall felt it in their chest before they understood it with their minds. One by one, without discussion, without being told, they dropped to their knees. Old Voron, whose coat was still stained with red wine, knelt on the stone floor with tears running silently down his face, and no visible awareness of them. Caelan himself, Caelan, who had not knelt to anything in 6 years of rulership, found his knees on the stone before the thought to resist had even formed. The presence that filled the room did not have a shape that anyone could describe afterward. It simply was, enormous, and attentive, and very, very old. When it spoke, everyone heard it differently, in whatever part of themselves listened to things larger than thought. What it said was this: "The one you mocked tonight is the one I chose for you. Not despite what she is, because of who she is. The bond has always been there. You chose contempt. There are consequences." It said more than that, but those were the words that remained. The presence left. The candles, which had all gone out, lit themselves again one by one. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Caelan looked at the mark on his arm. He looked at the doors through which Seraphine had walked without being dismissed, bleeding quietly into a cloth in her pocket. He looked at the elders still kneeling on the floor around him. He said nothing. There was nothing to say yet. He was a man who processed grief and shock and humiliation, and what he was feeling was all three of these things at once, by going very still and very internal, which looked from the outside like calm. It was not calm. The 30 days that followed were the education of Caelan Duskmoore, conducted without mercy and without a teacher, which was how the best and worst educations tend to work. On the first morning, he walked into his own war room and felt the heads turn toward him with polite attention rather than instinctive deference. His second looked at him the way a person looks at a colleague rather than a commander. His orders were heard and considered rather than simply obeyed. His presence, which had always preceded him like weather, arrived now like ordinary footsteps. He gave 3 commands that morning. 2 were gently redirected by members of his council who had never once, in 6 years, offered a counter-opinion. He went back to his chambers and sat with his hands open on his knees for a long time. On the 4th day, he went looking for Seraphine. He had told himself this was strategic. He needed to understand the bond, to find its edges, to determine how the moon goddess's correction could be reversed or negotiated. He told himself this with complete conviction. He found her in the archive. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 open books arranged around her, and a 4th on her knee, moving between them with the ease of someone conducting a familiar conversation. She looked up when he came in. She did not stand. She did not arrange her face into anything careful. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at someone they are deciding about. "You came to tell me this is not what you wanted," she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. He opened his mouth to say something measured and controlled. What came out instead was, "I don't know what I came to tell you." She considered this for a moment, then moved one of the books to make a space on the floor beside her. It was a very small gesture. He sat down anyway. That conversation lasted 4 hours. They did not discuss the bond, or the moon goddess, or the mark on his arm. They talked about the books she was reading. Old pack law, older than the current Elder Council, older than Ironblood itself. She had been working through the archive for months, she said, in whatever spare hours she could find, because she had decided that if she was going to exist in this pack, she was going to understand the actual rules rather than only the ones people chose to enforce. He had not known she was doing this. It had not occurred to him to wonder what she did with her time. He went back the next day, and the day after that. The second week, she allowed him to walk with her in the forest. Not the controlled, purposeful walks he was used to, patrols, routes with destinations, but the kind of walking that had no agenda except the walking itself. She showed him where the red bark trees grew in a cluster that she had been visiting since she was 12 years old. She showed him where the creek bent north and made a sound that was almost like conversation if you sat beside it long enough. He did not tell her about the 30-day correction, not yet. He did not want to be someone explaining himself. He wanted, for reasons he could not entirely articulate, to simply be present in a place where no one expected him to perform. Seraphine did not ask him to explain himself. He was learning, someone who had built a complete interior life that required no external permission to exist. She had opinions about everything: the Elder Council's governance history, the migratory patterns of birds she had watched from various windows over the years, the particular quality of light that existed for about 15 minutes on clear evenings just before it became dark. She offered these opinions without seeking agreement, and listened to his responses with genuine interest and without the careful performance of agreement that everyone else in his life had given him for years. It was extraordinarily disorienting. It was the most real thing that had happened to him in a very long time. On the 28th day, Elder Rain came to him privately. He laid out the situation without cruelty. The pack was unsettled. 2 neighboring territories had made quiet testing moves along the border. The council needed its Alpha King at full operational strength. There was a ritual. It was old and it was painful, and it would leave a mark on his wolf that would never fully heal, but it would sever the bond. It would restore everything. All he had to do was reject her. Caelan sat with it for 2 days. He sat with it in his war room, and in his chambers, and in the archive, where he had taken to spending time, even when Seraphine was not there. He sat with it in the forest, at the red bark trees, listening to the creek. He kept coming back to the night of the gathering, not the humiliation of the kneeling, not the moon goddess's voice, not the mark on his arm. He kept coming back to earlier than that, to Seraphine crouching on the floor in front of an entire room of powerful people, gathering broken glass with her bare hands, bleeding quietly, asking nothing of anyone. He kept coming back to the way she had looked at him the first day in the archive, not with hope, not with fear, with the careful, measuring interest of someone deciding whether a feral thing was worth the risk of feeding. On the morning of the 30th day, he went to her. He sat across from her at the small table in the archive, and he told her everything: the correction, the 30 days, what it had cost him, what the elder had offered, what restoring his power would require. He did not soften it. He did not angle it. He simply told her the truth and then stopped talking, which was one of the hardest things he had done in 6 years of difficult rulership. Seraphine was quiet for a long time. "What do you want?" she asked. He stopped.
Start it again. I want to choose correctly. For the first time in what I think has been a very long time, I want to choose correctly. She looked at him. He looked back. Then you already know what you're going to do, she said.
He walked into the Elder Council's chamber that afternoon with Seraphine beside him. Not behind him, not following, but beside him, occupying the space at his left shoulder as though she had always been there, which in some way that mattered more than ceremony, she had. He did not invoke the severance ritual. He placed a single document on the council table, old parchment, pulled from the archive, the ink faded to a pale brown, but the words completely legible. Pack law. Older than anyone in the room, the right of a fated mate to full standing within an alpha's pack, regardless of birth rank, regardless of omega status, regardless of anyone's preference on the matter. Elder Rain looked at it for a long moment. "This law," he said carefully, "has not been invoked in 412 years, Seraphine said. "I found 3 references. The original statute is on page 40 of the Ironblood foundational record. I can take you to the shelf." Silence. The bond settled between them in that quiet moment, not like lightning, not like something dramatic and announced, but like a fire that had been lit a long time ago, finally burning through the wall it had been built behind, warmth, steady, and without performance. Caelan did not apologize to the room. That was not where the apology belonged. The apology was a private thing, built not of words, but of the specific and practical action of a man who knew how to use power and had decided, finally, to use it correctly, ensuring that each person who had laughed that night understood, individually and without room for misinterpretation, that he had noticed and that he would not forget. Seraphine, when he told her this later, looked at him with the particular expression she wore when she found him slightly excessive. She didn't say it. She was learning, carefully, and with some difficulty, that being known was something that could be survived. So was he.